Zeta 2 Reticuli is a binary star system located 39 light-years from Earth, comprising two G-type main sequence stars, yellow dwarfs, known as Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli. The distance between these two orbiting suns is approximately 3,750 astronomical units. In reality, no planets have ever been observed in this system. However, within the Alien franchise, Zeta 2 Reticuli is home to a gas giant named Calpamos, which hosts 3 orbiting moons, LV-426, LV-223, and a third enigmatic cosmic wanderer yet to be revealed. The films never explicitly state which of the two stars, Zeta 1 or Zeta 2, Calpamos and its moons orbit. Yet subtle hints from the filmmakers, scripts, supplementary lore, and clues embedded within the film suggest that all 3 moons are neighbouring bodies circling the same gas giant. Whether this system gave rise to the xenomorph remains somewhat uncertain, and there are no strong signs that it is regarded as the ancestral domain of the ancient and enigmatic celestial arbiters, whose legacy here is carved plainly into stone and memory. Still, these small but significant orbs hold tremendous value in expanding our understanding of some of the most profound questions within the alien legacy. Questions that probe the nature of this perfect organism, the identity of the towering humanoid overseers, and the profound mystery of why one of their kind, or possibly a close genetic relative or precursor species, was discovered fossilized on the moon of LV-426, later named Acheron, entombed within its monolithic forgotten ship, a derelict carrying a cargo of mythic horrors. Yet before we can determine a reason for the Juggernaut's presence here, or the circumstances behind its fateful abandonment on this primeval moon, we must first confront the significance of Zeta 2 Reticuli and its sinister history. LV-426, a primordial moon, was first surveyed and catalogued by a French deep space probe in the 2040s, but remained untouched until 2122 when a Weyland-Yutani corporate priority override redirected the crew of the US CSS Nostromo via its onboard AI named Mother to investigate a mysterious transmission originating from a moon of Calpamos in Zeta 2 Reticuli.
God.
Initially presumed to be a distress beacon, the signal was later recognised as a warning. 3 crew members set out on foot to trace its source and made a haunting discovery: a vast asymmetrical crescent-shaped interstellar vehicle with a broad central body and 2 forward-sweeping extensions or prongs. Its hull was dark, rigid and textured, bearing an organic, almost bone-like appearance, like the exoskeleton of an insect or the fossilised remains of some menacing ancient structure. The ship's interior offered no respite from a creeping sense of primordial dread and an oppressive, suffocating silence, as the crew cautiously traversed through what could only be described as the ribcage of a colossal Lovecraftian creature, its walls resembling both musculature and machinery. They eventually came upon a chamber housing a relic beyond their understanding. In its centre stood a gargantuan control console which seated a giant preserved being, roughly estimated to be between 15 and 20 feet tall. 3 key details stood out to the crew: its level of fossilization indicating a death long past, perhaps millennia. The humanoid also appeared grown into the chair, displaying an unusual biomechanical fusion. And lastly, a large ruptured wound in its chest, suggesting the birth of a formidable larva with the capability of unleashing immense force upon its victim. In the ship's cavernous cargo hold, initially discovered by First Officer Kane, who was unsure whether he had entered a natural cavern or subterranean chamber beneath the vessel.
A cave! A cave of some sort.
Thousands of leathery pods lay in ominous silence. Could it be that Kane had actually stumbled upon an underground storehouse, one that the Juggernaut had merely docked with before its pilot met his demise? The labyrinthine corridors, endless and winding, bore little resemblance to the ship's design above, and an isolated and secure storehouse for such finalized organic specimens on a lone moon would certainly befit the organism's hostile nature. A cold, eerie blue mist drifted over the ovomorphs, either seeping from the eggs themselves or generated by the built-in preservation systems. Its purpose seemed clear: to maintain the organic cargo in perfect stasis, insulating them from decay. A sharp, unsettling contrast to the ruined aesthetic of the rest of the dilapidated craft and its hauntingly still navigator. Once the protective field was breached, triggering an electrical pulse from a nearby egg, Cain became the first recorded host in an extraordinarily hostile reproductive cycle, one that culminated after gestation in the emergence of a highly aggressive endoparasitoid, the creature later designated Xenomorph XX121. LV-426 remained largely uninhabited following the destruction of the Nostromo in 2122. Despite archived records of the derelict signal, first intercepted by the Nostromo, later disabled by the Anisadora crew in 2137 en route to Sevastopol Station, and reports from Science Officer Ash detailing the encounter, Weyland-Yutani nevertheless established the Hadley's Hope colony on the planetoid in 2157, sending 158 colonists to begin terraforming and resource extraction operations. Early colonial scans had not detected the derelict due to its matching amorphous shape in comparison to the moon's terrain, as well as the ship's other innate stealth capabilities. By early 2179, the atmospheric processor had achieved semi-habitable conditions, and the colony operated with limited success. In June of that year, Special Projects Director Carter Burke, having recently studied past archived events, ordered the colonists to find and investigate the derelict spacecraft, found only 20 kilometers east of the colony. This insidious directive led to a communications breakdown, prompting a search and rescue mission by colonial marines from the US CSS Sulaco. After the tactical unit discovered the facility seemingly abandoned and overrun by a xenomorph infestation, the inevitable clash ignited a fierce firefight within the atmosphere processor's cooling system, triggering an unstoppable chain reaction. The resulting damage prompted a catastrophic thermonuclear explosion, releasing an estimated 40 megatons of energy and producing a blast radius of 30 kilometers, rendering LV-426's surface uninhabitable in the aftermath. While official confirmation remains classified, it is likely that parts of the derelict ship, along with its preserved lifeform, survived the devastation, especially if, indeed, they were stored in a subterranean vault and not on board the derelict. LV-223, a more temperate moon with a denser atmosphere than Acheron, became the site of humanity's first expedition to the Zeta 2 Reticuli system in 2091, following the discovery of an ancient recurring star map found in multiple locations across Earth. Deciphered by archaeologists Dr. Elizabeth Shaw and Dr. Charlie Holloway in 2089, the map led them to this unique star system, unknowingly accompanied by Peter Weyland himself aboard his flagship vessel, the US CSS Prometheus. The Prometheus was a marvel of its time, boasting advanced faster-than-light capabilities, newly patented cryostasis chambers, state-of-the-art surgical and medical pods, and experimental Alpha Reader Dreamlink technology, the latter a prototype lost along with the ship. As the Prometheus descended onto the barren plains of LV-223, the crew beheld wonders beyond the limitations of human hubris. Impossibly vast structures as if hewn from rock by God's own hand and arranged in perfect formation, their monolithic shapes rising from the mist like ancient monuments. Surrounding roads stretched out in precise alignment, echoing the eerie patterns of the Nazca geoglyphs in Peru. Except this wasn't Earth, and awe must have flooded through them, a waking dream, standing on the doorstep of the gods. Yet beneath that awe stirred a creeping dread, a sense that they were trespassers in a place not intended for them. They had come seeking answers, but the silent halls and cavernous passages of these titanic pyramids whispered of a truth far older, far more alien than they had ever imagined. What awaited them inside was an intricate network of corridors and connecting rooms, a vault of cosmically exotic artifacts and fragmented echoes of a forgotten past, a plethora of inscrutable relics and broken pieces of otherworldly history, as incomprehensible as the towering murals and bizarre structural architecture. Each discovery seemed to pulse with hidden meaning, yet the deeper they ventured, the more they sensed a terrible, unspoken truth, lurking just beyond their grasp. The murals suggested many things, but one in particular told of the genesis of a being, a creature feared, revered, and possibly even worshipped. But why?
Sometimes to create, one must first destroy.
Perhaps only David could begin to understand the engineer's obsession with a reproductive system so violent and perverse, yet so pure in its singular purpose. The total subjugation of biology to design. The mural portrayed a life cycle rooted in sacrifice, shaped by the extraordinary properties of a sacred mutagenic accelerant used in ritual, a technology used for both reproduction and destruction. This agent may have played a central role in the engineer's philosophy of reproduction, offering not only a possible means to propagate, but also a twisted form of immortality, the unlimited power to create. They were ancient beyond reckoning, their bodies so altered by technology that natural reproduction had become impossible through choice, and was their greatest existential threat. Their salvation, arriving in the form of bioengineering and genetic seeding, may have arrived by chance when they discovered LV-223 in the Zeta 2 Reticuli system during a long and meticulous surveying of the stars. A second mural depicts a creature strikingly similar to the early concept art by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett for the original beast envisioned in 1979's Alien. In their initial drafts, these beings were imagined as primitive inhabitants of an ancient world, an archaic species whose biology made reproduction both complex and perilous. To sustain their lineage, they depended on a third life form, a sacrificial host implanted with spores from their eggs. This necessity evolved into a sacred ritual, transforming reproduction into religion, and inspiring the construction of vast temples designated to facilitate this cyclical process of birth and death, lending a haunting realism to H.R. Giger's artwork. This exotic species perished millions of years ago in a cataclysm that wiped out the moon's fauna, leaving behind only the eggs. Without hosts or caretakers, the spores remained alive but dormant for countless ages, until the engineers arrived. The reproductive process of these spores feels eerily familiar, one that resonates even more clearly when examining the reproductive behaviours of the xenomorph. The positioning of the engineer in relation to the cowering figure beneath speaks volumes, an unsettling fusion of human and insect forms. At first glance, the gesture appears reverent, as if acknowledging a subject whose purpose has been fulfilled. Yet the manner in which the engineer's hand merges with the creature's head suggests a more disturbing truth. This service may not have been offered but taken, extracted by a higher species seeking to harvest the divine gift of immortality, before the last light within them fades. In a third mural, the same creature is shown again, its textured exoskeleton and bifurcated fingers clutching an egg, inhaling its spores and willingly sacrificing itself to perpetuate its kind. Is it possible that through the facilitation of the engineers, this creature may represent a precursor, perhaps even the origin of the xenomorph itself? It therefore may be reasonable to assume that LV-223 did not originally belong to the engineers.
There is nothing in the desert, and no man needs nothing.
The orderly arrangement of its ritual temples was likely repurposed, both in design and function, to serve the broader needs of these creators and their belief systems. Their likeness now dominates portions of the structure, imposing and authoritarian, as well as their image carved upon its towering tip, which was once exposed to the sky and a place where reproduction took place. The temple itself may have been altered, even engineered, to assist with localized air purification within the pyramids, providing breathable air for those inside and perhaps even aiding in long-term planet-wide terraforming to suit the needs of its new masters. With subterranean hangar bays long since installed and endless storage rooms stocked with their most valuable invention, it is perhaps ironic that the occupants of this once majestic special operations facility ultimately fell prey some 2,000 years ago to the very thing that once granted them the unlimited power to create life and extend their own. But what exactly was the sequence of events that led to this outbreak and the annihilation of all but one of its caretakers? Theoretical analysis of this moon places it in the same category as LV-426 and LV-223, a larger satellite orbiting beyond the Roche limit of its gas giant host, situated slightly farther from the ring system. Such moons are typically geologically diverse and remain stable in orbit. Their common characteristics a rocky or icy composition, tidal lock-in where one side permanently faces the planet, and the potential for a thin atmosphere or subsurface oceans, make them ideal candidates for long-term study and exploitation. Yet without complete transparency from the dominant corporate entities operating throughout known space, little can be confirmed about this moon and the secrets it may hide. Still, if one lends any weight to circulating rumours, it is said that pirates once made landfall on its surface only to abandon it, deeming the icy terrain inhospitable. Given the wealthiest company's long history of exploiting frozen ocean worlds, the strategic and resource potential here cannot be dismissed, especially when considering in tandem with its close proximity to its neighbouring moons, as discussed previously. From the perspective of our progenitors, the genetic architects who are understood to have sculpted us into being, and perhaps others, such a planetary pairing might not be a coincidence at all, but rather a calculated arrangement, two moons positioned to serve complementary roles in a larger, unknowable design. It stands to reason that a highly advanced and meticulously organised species, such as the Engineers, who demonstrated a deep understanding of the volatile mutagenic agent that Weyland-Yutani classifies as the Prometheus strain, would strategically distribute their operations across multiple moons, each separated by function and isolated by the vast vacuum of space. This compartmentalization likely functioned as a deliberate safeguard, minimizing the risk of accidental exposure and widespread contamination. Suppose the third moon of Calpamos was indeed a critical node in their grand pursuit of engineered immortality and the creation of a perfect organism. In that case, the remnants of their work would most likely endure still. Fortunately, while the films deliberately preserve many of the deepest mysteries surrounding the Zeta 2 Reticuli system, important clues are there to be analysed, only partially obscured. With the help of deleted scenes, concept art, and the persistent curiosity of David himself, narratives emerge from theories that account for the presence of both engineers and xenomorphs in this star system. Firstly, it's essential to establish a premise that underscores the immense value the three moons of Calpamos once held for the engineers. As discussed in the analysis of Moon 2, LV-223 may have been home to an ancient species with reproductive traits analogous to the xenomorph, though their eggs carried spores rather than parasitic implantation organisms such as facehuggers. It was likely to be this primordial race, a possible ancestor of the xenomorph, that first constructed the Lion Stone domes, using them as temples to support their reproductive rituals. Much later, the advanced beings we know as the Engineers presumably discovered the remnants of this fallen civilization. Upon finding these weathered temples of antiquity, they swiftly recognized the enduring potency of the spores and began to decipher their significance into something more malleable for their needs. It's highly plausible that all three moons were used as operational facilities in this remote region of space, sites where the engineers conducted and perfected their experiments before storing them in mass containment for purposes of world-seeding warfare or strategic contingencies. Although the facility on LV-223 may have once been the origin place of both this miracle and horror, when later occupied by the engineers, it was unlikely to have functioned primarily as a research or testing site. Nothing within the temple's many chambers suggested active experimentation. Instead, the space appeared to be one of worship, reverence, and secure storage. While it may have played a role in processing or refining the black pathogen, the installation's environmentally sealed architecture and methodical storage systems indicate that safe containment was its foremost priority. A counter-argument to this would be that only one pyramid was explored. However, given the perilous nature of the substance and the free moon theory overall, the other temples were presumably just clones. Given the vast number of subterranean hangar bays tailored for their juggernaut ships, the complex may also have served as a transportation hub for precious biological cargo. The crashed juggernaut, known as the derelict discovered on LV-426, holds immense significance in unraveling the larger mystery. The crew of the Nostromo determined that the pilot's remains were ancient beyond reckoning. This is a crucial clue in piecing together this cosmic enigma. First, the presence of multiple final form biologics in an early xenomorph life cycle, possibly dating back millennia, strongly suggests that the engineers had already mastered this creation long before David ever attempted to resurrect the beast. Second, suppose the eggs were stored in a cavernous vault beneath the ship, rather than in the vessel's cargo hold. In that case, not only would it reveal the purpose of this moon in connection to the others, xenomorph storage, but this detail becomes crucial to multiple proposed sequences of events explaining the pilot's demise, a set of theories I will outline in my Part 2 video. Lastly, we must ask, what was the significance of this pilot's increased stature compared to the other engineers? As seen in both holographic recordings and the resurrected surviving engineer encountered on LV-223. A distant cousin of the engineer or a breakaway civilization seems less plausible than the notion of an elder race. Beings who may have founded many wondrous things, including the engineers themselves. The third moon, unfortunately never explored in alien lore, may therefore have been the site of grand ambition and horrific biological transformation. If LV-223 served as the facility for synthesizing and refining the mutagenic accelerant, as well as its secure containment, and LV-426 functioned as a vault for the end product, xenomorph overmorphs hidden deep underground and shielded from time's decay and unwelcome visitors. In that case, the remaining satellite might have been dedicated to something far more disturbing, the alarming transmutation of natural organic life. Here, the black substance engineered from spores originally discovered on LV-223 could have reached its final, most terrible expression, shaping living matter into the ultimate metamorph, a life form whose design reflects a purity beyond comprehension. The biggest clue as to what occurred on the third moon can be extrapolated from David's work. Of all of his accomplishments, his greatest was discovering the key ingredient needed to bring about such a deadly organism. His research began on board the Prometheus when he secretly distributed the black ambiguous material to Dr. Holloway and inadvertently learnt, much to Elizabeth Shaw's delight, that female ovaries were the much-needed X-factor in the mutagen's ability to propagate advanced life from its host, rather than mutate beyond recognition. Therefore, if we adhere to David's revelation regarding his experiments on Dr. Shaw, carried out entirely by force, her unwilling biological contribution resulted in far more drastic advancements and critical knowledge than the limited success he achieved using a vast array of exotic flora and fauna found on Planet 4. Through the careful application of the mutagen to organic matter harvested from Shaw's remains, particularly her ovaries, he likely employed scientific principles such as gametogenesis as a framework for creation. This suggests that he may have artificially mimicked spermatogenesis, using the dark accelerant to fertilize Shaw's ovarian material, effectively transforming her gametes into vessels for alien hybridization. With no natural sperm available, certainly not from a synthetic, David may have used the black substance itself, with its DNA mutating and hybridizing properties, as a spermatogenic analogue. Alternatively, it is highly plausible that he resorted to engineering alien sperm-like cells from the mutated remains of the humanoid sub-engineer population he eradicated upon arrival. Considering the engineers share our DNA, and use this potential biological material to inseminate Shaw's oocytes, thereby achieving his intended result. Based on David's primitive yet remarkable effective application of science, it is reasonable to assume that the engineers employed a similar application of the mutagen to achieve the results observed on LV-426, albeit with vastly more profound knowledge of the substance's intricate workings. A mere glance at their creations reveals a clear reverence for the female form, possibly symbolizing both their fixation on creation and the indispensable role of female reproductive organs in enabling the process. Once again, we are reminded of the enduring relevance of H.R. Giger's haunting illustrations, which may allude to a critical and transformative stage of creation that unfolded on the third moon of Calpamos. If this elusive moon was the site where the engineers birthed their finest creations, later stored on LV-426, by merging the mutagenic accelerant refined on LV-223, with female ovaries harvested here on the third moon, then which females were sacrificed in this pursuit of biological perfection? When we turn to the concept art developed for the prequel films, remarkable works in their own right, one particular piece stands out. Within a structure resembling a temple, two female statues face each other beneath towering majestic archways that are precisely aligned with the entrance. The architecture possesses a quietly divine quality, one that appears to elevate the female form, though with greater subtlety than the nightmarishly psychosexual imagery created by Hans Giger. However, were these lofty constructions erected purely for sacred reverence, or out of a necessity far more sinister? The same temple appears within the city on Planet 4, where David unleashed death upon its inhabitants using an inescapable payload of urns designed to disperse the mutagenic substance via a weaponized airburst. The beings who lived there closely resembled the engineers. However, they lacked the biomechanical fusion of flesh and technology, a trait that may have eliminated gender from the original engineer form. If this civilization, likely created by the engineers, was indeed subservient and devoted to their creators, as suggested by their awestruck and joyful reaction to the arrival of a juggernaut, the first to return in perhaps many years, or 2,000 years if we consider the events of Zeta 2 Reticuli, then it is plausible that a select few females were once granted a sacred role, to serve as sacrificial offerings to their living gods, a sacrifice perhaps unbeknownst to these peoples, intended to bring forth organic purity in its most lethal form, and to fulfill the ambitions of the engineer faction that long ago occupied the 3 moons of Calpamos. For all of the spectacle within David's workshop, albeit impressive, he merely claimed these forgotten secrets for himself, and took great pride in cultivating the xenomorph as his own. However, these biological anomalies were granted life long ago, just as we were, but their structural perfection, matched only by their hostility, came to represent something far more significant to their original creators, a realization of evolutionary finality, one that compelled them to temper their godlike sovereignty when harnessing such power over life and death. Through David's study while marooned on Planet 4, we come to understand that the engineers were beings who accepted that one must give life to both the lamb and the wolf, but later sought to undo the wolves and banish their own creation. David's scientific breakthroughs on Planet 4 marked a stunning leap in the understanding and manipulation of the engineers' primordial ooze, decades before similar efforts practiced in vain on board the Renaissance station in 2142 took place. A substance rich in advanced nanoparticles and governed by an algorithm rooted in evolutionary computing. In essence, it was a form of radical AI, rendering the substance unpredictably adaptive and profoundly chaotic, generating a unique reaction with every genome it encounters, reshaping life with seemingly limitless potential. If these conclusions about the engineer's use of each moon are true, then what manifestation of circumstances some 2,000 years ago led to the apparent abandonment of this entire star system by a godlike race? A race that may have been divided not only by species and faction, but by intentions. In my part 2 of my 3 Moons of Calpamos series, I'll attempt to answer some of these pressing questions, such as why and how was all but one engineer killed on LV-223? What was the role of the potentially benevolent being known as the Space Jockey, later discovered on LV-426? And did this giant play a part in the collapse of the engineers' plan to reset life on Earth 2 millennia ago? Remember, the secrets and mysteries of the Alien franchise are like fine wine, best bottled, stored and rarely disturbed, if these films are to preserve their integrity. That said, there's no harm in a little theoretical tasting now and then. Stay tuned for part 2 in the near future. Take care.